we are all fucked up.
Yeah.
You know, we all are struggling with post-traumatic stress. Guys are going into depression. They're having panic attacks.
This is Marcus Capone, a former Navy SEAL with multiple combat deployments under his belt.
There was this kind of almost like an epidemic, right? Of SEALs experiencing more trauma or more difficulty in integrating in life than dying abroad.
It was horrible. I mean, there were guys that were really broken, like absolutely broken.
It felt like we were getting out alive by the skin of our teeth.
Marcus and his wife Amber founded Veteran Solutions to advance psychedelic-assisted therapy for vets.
I grew up in a very sheltered Christian home, and I didn't even know that Ibogaine was necessarily a psychedelic. I just knew it was a treatment in Mexico.
Like, I didn't understand psychedelics. All I could think of was hippies and running around with flowers in your hair. And
Was his life saved? Yeah.
This is their narrative.
Can you tell me about the day that you decided to join the Navy and kind of what your mind frame was like around becoming a Navy SEAL?
yeah, it was actually the end of my junior year in college. I still had a year left. I was done playing football. I had a year left of school. And the thought of stepping off in a work environment, 22 years old with a shirt and tie. Really, I grew up playing ball. I was a jock, and it really scared me to think that at 22 years old, I was done. I felt like I was done, hang up everything, and this was it. And so for me, I saw a special on TV. I actually saw a movie. It was a bit embarrassing. G.I. Jane at the time. I had no military experience, no background. And, for me, this was like an introduction to the military, even though it's not, right? It's Hollywood. It's a movie. But it intrigued me because they talked about the best of the best in this movie. And I said, wow, that seems pretty cool. Like, is this real? To me, I thought it was real. Obviously didn't know that Demi Moore was not real. But from that point forward, I got really interested in the SEAL teams, and I started reading every book I can find. There wasn't really anything at that time online, so I went to the library and I found as many books as I can on the SEAL teams, and most of them was written after Vietnam or during Vietnam. And so the more I read, the more intrigued I was, and then I just got laser focused. About a year before graduating my senior year, I said, this is what I want to do, for the next foreseeable future.
And was there a point in like the early career of the training where you ever questioned like that this was for you, or did you, once you joined, you were in it and you felt, that the team, the brotherhood, and that it was kind of your place?
Initially I was extremely excited, graduated college. A lot of stuff was happening at that time. When I enlisted in the Navy, it was everything I wanted to do at the time. And when I got to Buds, actually, there was a little bit of apprehension there because I remember we were all sitting together right in the beginning of training, and it didn't even start yet. There was 175 of us, and I was looking around, and I was just thinking, like, how am I going to really be able to be 30 out of this one, or 40? That was numbers. It was such a high attrition. And I was just scratching my head a little bit because there were so many good athletes there and so many talented individuals that I just thought, man, am I going to be one of these, 1 out of 5 that are going to make it through? And so there was a little bit of that initially, but once we got started, like I felt like I was in my zone. I was right where I was supposed to be. Yeah. And nothing from that point forward was questioned that I wasn't going to make it through training. The only thing I was worried about is potentially getting hurt. But, there never was a doubt in my mind that I wasn't going to get through Bud's basic underwater demolition SEAL training.
And what was happening like macroeconomically? Like what was happening in the world at that time? And, what did you perceive would be the missions that you would be going after and doing?
Yeah. So before graduation, I was the first class to graduate when the towers came down in 9/11. Before that, there was nothing going on, and there was not a lot going on in the military. And so we didn't know what we were doing. As students, we were just doing something we thought was cool. We run on the beach and get in shape, and, we get to shoot things and blow things up and jump out of airplanes. And that was really cool. After 9/11, there was this whole shift in everything. And still from us as students, we just wanted to finish training, which was only in a couple weeks.
Yeah.
But the instructors, you can see the ones that had been in for 10 or 15 years, you can see the demeanor completely changed. Yeah. So they went from this kind of, I don't want to say happy-go-lucky, but fiery group of instructors to all of a sudden their demeanor was like very serious. And it was, hey, we're going to war now. Does anybody understand that? And we didn't understand what that meant. The guys who've been in for a while did. And you could see it on their face, like, oh shit, this is real. And there's actually individuals that had graduated from SEAL training, went on to, it's called SEAL qualification training. It's like another 6 months of advanced training. There were individuals who actually quit then, finding out that, oh, you're actually going to go to war now. And some individuals just, they did not sign up for that. They signed up for like the cool, fun aspect of everything you kind of heard and read about. But some people didn't want to go to war.
Yeah. And so, how many years were you active as a Navy SEAL?
I was 13 years active.
13 years. And can you share some of maybe like the most mentally, taxing missions that you might have been on?
Yeah. I mean, BUDS itself, BUDS is, we call it, basic training for SEALs, basic underwater demolition SEAL training. It's 6 months. It's grueling. It's demanding. It's mental, physical. But you get through it.
Yeah.
And I think you get to your platoon and you start training with your platoon of 18 individuals. You do that for a 1.5 to 2 years, and then you deploy. It's just the constant grind. So it's the constant, you never, ever have a break. You're gone 300 days out of the year. And so it's not one thing, Milan, that like would stick out that say, oh, this thing was so hard. It's the getting up every single day and doing it again. I used to tell people what was the hardest part of BUDS. There was never like a surf uh, uh, evolution or a running evolution or swimming that was so tough. Like you got through it. The hardest part every day was waking up at 4:30 or 5 a.m. Do it again. Cold in Southern California. The water's 58 degrees. You know you're going to be in there like within the hour. That's the hardest part. And many people don't know this. Most people quit in the morning. So it's not like a hard thing that they did the day before and they're like, you know what, I can't take this anymore. I ring the bell. They wake up in the morning. You're completely stiff. It's like, think about doing the hardest workout you've ever done every day. And so you wake up, you can't move. You're just swollen everywhere. You got to run. You got to go in the water. That's when people quit. So that part is really tough of just getting up and doing it and doing it. And it's the same way when you get to your platoon. You're constantly going. You don't have time to rest. And so, family life is almost, it's almost non-existent, and you're just focused on the mission. And the mission is every day, and that train can go for years.
Can you tell me when you first two met for the first time?
Yes. So my dad recruited Marcus to play football for him. Yeah, at a local university. And I'd been hearing about him, but I had never met him. And one night, one of my friends had too much to drink, and I had to go pick her up from a place that Marcus was at. And the bouncers let me in the back door to get her. And he was sitting right there on a stool. And I knew who he was because I had seen his picture in the paper, and I thought he was pretty cute. And then when I saw him in real life, I was just like, oh, wow. So we we exchanged numbers. I think after a few weeks, I kept going back on that night because you were there. And then one week you weren't there. And so his friend was a bouncer at this place, and I shouldn't have even been in there because I was 17. Um, and when Marcus wasn't there, I was like devastated. And so Jason, his friend, said, like, well, give me your number and I'll give it to him. He called me and we hung out the following weekend, I think, which was the 4th of July. And like from that point forward, we were together almost constantly.
Yeah, I don't think we left each other's side for 27 years.
Well, a lot of years along the way.
Military. But at the time when you met, did you know you were going to go to the military?
Mm-mm.
No, it was my sophomore year at college. Amber was a senior in high school. No, I was still playing ball, and no Demi Moore, G.I. Jane on the TV.
And how did that conversation go for the first time when when you told?
You remember it, don't you?
Yeah, I don't remember you watching G.I. Jane. I think it was probably like pre Discovery Channel
Yeah.
special. So Class 224 had a special on Discovery Channel. Maybe G.I. Jane kicked it off for him, but I remember him watching this special, and it was like the worst part of SEAL training where, and this is in the film, I'll say, they bind you at the wrists and at the ankles, and then you bob up and down in water. And like obviously you can speak more to that, but he was like, I can do that. Like that gets me going. Like he was an ocean lifeguard and a swimmer his whole life, and he was like, I want to do that. And I didn't know what a Navy SEAL was or what this training was. I grew up in a family that like 5 of my great uncles were in World War II. 2 of them were killed, another was killed in a training accident. And so I was raised in a very patriotic family where we honored veterans and we loved our country, but it was not I thought it was definitely not something that I wanted to do. He decided to go into the military and do this SEAL training, and I thought this is probably a really great jumping off point because I met him at 17 and I had really no like life experience, college experience, and I was sad about it, but we were very amicable, and like this idea to split up at the end of the semester before he graduated. So in that context, I felt like I didn't want to hold him back from his dreams, and he was older than me, so I was still in college and he was graduating, and I've never wanted to hold him back from his dreams. I would never be that kind of a partner, and so I just thought this isn't for me. Um, this is really important to him, and I don't know what the future holds, but I think we're not gonna stay together, like, there's really no other option.
Yeah. And when did you both get married? Did that happen later or
Well,
before the training?
about a month after we made this decision to split up, I found out that I was almost through my first trimester of pregnancy with our son.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's okay.
and so those days were really hard, and because, he was so excited about this new chapter of his life, this felt like, it just felt like such a blow, and I was so scared, and, we're thinking about how to navigate this situation. You kind of go through all of the options, and ultimately, I was just like, "I'm gonna have this baby, and if I raise the baby alone, then I raise the baby alone." And we did spend a lot of my pregnancy apart, but because Marcus is, like, always coming through, um no matter what, he's going to do the right thing. He, reconnected with me shortly before our son was born, and he's like, "I don't know what this means, but we gotta do this together, and we'll figure it out." And that's exactly what we did.
And so, how long after that was it when you were first deployed out of the country?
So still a couple years because that was in 2000, actually 2000, no, 2000. I graduated. Then I enlisted in 2000. I went to Buds in 2001. I got to my first platoon in
Oh, 02.
'02 and didn't deploy until like
He deployed in
'03,
uh,
'03, I think, early. So I mean, it was still, yeah, it was still a couple years.
Yeah.
But as soon as I got to the team, it was like I mentioned, it was nonstop. I was gone all the time for training.
And so the first time I guess Marcus came back from after being overseas, what was that like?
well, I think that I was so young and naive. I was 20 at the time. Um, to have a baby and move so far away and then be supporting him through what many would say is the world's toughest military training. Like no one had a baby. There was maybe 1 or 2 others that had kids, but like, most of them weren't even married. We were so young, and I think I was just super naive in thinking that we would get he would get through SEAL training, like the 6-month block of training, and then somehow things would get easier or we would be normal. And I think that my naivete all along the way has sort of been like a protection mechanism, because if I had really known or really ruminated on how hard it could be, um, I, it probably would have been easier to quit. I don't have a lot of quit in me, so I was always pretty committed to figuring it out. But, I just when he got back from his first deployment, it was kind of like, okay, well, we checked that box. And 9/11 had happened. Like, you go into the military during a time of peace, and very shortly thereafter, you find yourself in a time of war. And then, you're part of a force that is forward deployed in this fight again and again and again and again. It was unprecedented. It was unprecedented even for our community. You like my great uncles who died in World War II. They did one tour, like maybe two for those that survived. Now we have veterans that have done like over 20. And so there was no preparation for that. It was like, you just figure it out and you adapt on the fly. And it wasn't just the military members that had to adapt, it was the families as well. So, you know, seeing him come back from his first deployment, it kind of felt like, okay, well, we checked the deployment box without knowing that we would do that again and again and again.
Was there a moment when you kind of remember looking back now that your naivete kind of died, or the moment where you gained this awareness of,
Yeah.
oh, things are not the way I perceived they would be going?
The crash of the Operation Red Wings incident, where 11 SEALs were lost in one helicopter crash. And it wasn't just something that you heard on the news. I thought SEALs were invincible. I remember having thoughts like, wow, nothing ever happens to them. They really are trained well. They really are, the best in the business in what they do. Like and then you lose 11 people that personally, and you're friends with their spouses, and you see their children at their funeral being handed a flag. And then you're like, oh boy,
Yeah,
they're not invincible.
yeah. Marcus, can you talk about that time a little bit? What was that like for you?
Yeah, that was, we were deployed at the time, and it was a really tough week when that whole mission went down, because these were guys that I trained with for the last 2 years, slept with, was on the road with. When we slept with, I mean, we were just, we were together um, all the time. And, my teammates, and just finding out, hour after hour, we were getting reports back from home. Really, it was weird, kind of how things were working back then. It was 2005, but we were getting intel back from our spouses about, Navy personnel in dress blues showing up at so and so's door and delivering the bad news. And it was horrible. I mean, it was a tough week. I mean, we were just sad. Like, we didn't know how to react. I mean, there were guys that were really broken in my platoon for a while, like absolutely broken. Like, could not, just shocked that we had just lost so many friends, guys that we just saw, a couple months earlier. And, we at the time just couldn't do anything about it except, maybe reflect. We drank a lot to kind of numb out everything and try to have some semblance of, fun and peace and laughter in the middle of all of it. But, this was the largest loss of life in the SEAL community's history in a long time, I believe, since Vietnam. And,
I think it was ever
it may have been,
at the time.
and we just didn't know how to react and didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
And, you just, at the end of the day, you're still fighting. So you kind of wake up, put your boots back on, and then go back out there. And that's what it was. So many of us, although, we were reflecting on what has just happened, I don't think anybody was really processing what actually happened.
That week was a bit of an anomaly too, because there were 4 individuals that had gone out on a reconnaissance mission. 3 of them were killed, but there was 1 lone survivor, and they were looking for him. And the helicopter that went down was a group of SEALs that were going to help them. And so while he was still missing, everything was halted. And so days, like almost a week had gone by, and no one knew if their spouse was part of that helicopter, you know,
Wow.
crash. And it was agony. And the days were just ticking by. And that's why Marcus was like completely unaware, because when the knocks started happening, everyone was just like anticipating the worst. And then, 11 individuals ended up dying. It was terrible.
It's terrible. At the time, was there, I guess, among the 2 separate communities, so for both of you, the community that you had here that was home, the wives, but also whoever else was here, the kids, and then for you, the brotherhood that you had, was there any conversation around mental health? Were there resources offered? Did anyone ever go to therapy? Was that normal at the time?
So no one ever talked about therapy before that. And right after that incident, we were my platoon was in Germany, and we had to forward deploy immediately because they had lost almost everyone in their platoon. They came back to Germany, and evidently the psychologist flew into Germany, and they were supposed to sit down with every active duty member, part of that platoon, to talk. I believe it was 30 minutes. And most of them didn't want to do it. And the first person sat in there and didn't come out for like 2.5 or 3 hours. And so there was a lot of stuff to unpack, right? And I don't know what those conversations were like, but it sounded like those guys were feeling it, and it was heavy, and it's just stuff we don't think about. We never think about at that time, because you're Superman. You're going 100 miles an hour, and you don't really think about any of the stuff that happens, down the road.
Oh, and what about for you, like the community that was here? I mean, for you witnessing what's happening, the wives losing their husbands, like, was there any conversation around mental health for people that were here?
No, no, not really. You
I think they called it like grievance counseling, or like I think that you remember that term. It was like, they'll have somebody available, if you need to.
Yeah. I think, what a lot of our time in the SEAL community consisted of was just sheer survival mode. Because if you think about like a natural disaster, hurricane, or tornado, whatever, it's almost easier to live through the event itself than clean up the aftermath. And it seemed like we were always in the event itself. So there was always a death. There was always there was always someone to rally around. There was always the fear of death, and you couldn't really like take a break to think about the big picture, because it was so real and it was in your face so much that it would have been like it could have been the undoing of this sort of like battle mentality that not just the guys had, but the wives had as well. So like, there was a righteous anger after 9/11 of like, get over there and like do whatever you need to do. And a lot of my friends who lost husbands would say things like he was doing exactly what he would want to be doing. It was just a mindset that was like, we have to get through this right now. And the difficult part definitely caught up to us and has caught up with our community, I think, as a whole, which is surveying the aftermath and cleaning it up.
When we kind of look at the aftermath now, there's tons of statistics, which you all would be better at naming probably, about mental health issues and suicide among SEALs. When did that all start to become really apparent, that there was this kind of almost like an epidemic, right? Like a real problem of SEALs almost having, experiencing more trauma or more difficulty in integrating in life than dying abroad?
Yeah, early 2000, I think it was either 10 or 11 for me. Um, I started struggling a little bit, and coworker, colleague, teammate of mine just said, "Hey, I think you should go talk to the psychologist, like talk to the." So that's what I did. I went to see the psych, and he goes, Marcus, you're about the 200th person that has come in here in the last like year or two, and you all have the same issues. He's like, I don't know he literally said, I don't know what's going on,
Yeah.
but you're all coming in here and telling me the same things. And so now, you look back, you go, well, yeah, I mean, we are all fucked up.
Yeah.
We all are struggling with post-traumatic stress, mild or actual traumatic brain injury. Guys are going into depression. They're having panic attacks. Years of injuries are catching up. So guys can't, if they're injured, they can't operate. They can't operate. They get depressed. So there's like this. And I just remember that a first meeting I had, and I remember saying to him, because I never heard about any of this.
Yeah.
I was like, no, I'm struggling with some stuff. And here he is, the psych telling me going, I don't know what's going on. Like he didn't know. He was like, I don't know what's going on. Like there's something going on in the community because he literally said, you're like the 200th SEAL that's come in here to talk about exactly what you're saying. You're angry, you can't sleep, you have nightmares, and nobody was we would literally laugh at that time of the term PTSD. They're we don't get PTSD. We like going overseas. We want to go to war. Doesn't mean that you don't have, chronic potentially PTSD, or obviously, it is what it is. And so that was the first time that it really opened my eyes a little bit that I wasn't the only one. Actually, it felt good, knowing that I'm not the only one here, kind of raising my hand and asking for some advice. Really, it wasn't like help at the time, but it was like, hey, what's going on with me? Help me out here.
I would say the first time for me realizing that there was something um, more of an epidemic in our community as a whole was actually after we spoke out and found the courage to share our story. People came out of the woodwork. And before it was kind of like this notion of, yeah, I heard that I'm like the 200th guy, but like, seems like everyone's fine. And everyone is fine on the surface, but behind closed doors, these families were falling apart. But because the community, I don't know if it's just used to operating in secrecy or this massive competitiveness that exists or this like reluctance to show weakness, no one was talking about it. And when we spoke out about it, like if I had $1 for every person who said to me, "Oh my gosh, we're struggling too, please don't tell anyone." And I'm like, that's what the problem is, that we're not telling anyone.
Yeah, I mean, Milan, we didn't talk about it either for a while, for a long time. I mean, some of my close friends, of course,
Yeah.
but even some others have said, man, I didn't even know. Others like, we get invited out to do stuff. I would never go. And they said, man, I wish I would have known like you were struggling.
Yeah.
And they would say that years later. They say, and now I know why you didn't want to come out, or you didn't call me back, or you didn't text me or whatever. So.
And what were the symptoms? Like what did you start to identify in your life? Because if it wasn't talked about as PTSD and you would kind of laugh off that term, like what was it that gave you the energy and courage to go in and kind of address it and maybe get a diagnosis?
I think it was like like feeling of like loneliness. You're the only one. You feel like you've lost your team,
Yeah.
right? I feel like I didn't have any team structure. Felt like I didn't have friends. I felt like, again, I'm the only one, the weight's on my shoulders. Nobody else dealing with anything. Nobody understands. Those were like the initial signs that I was getting. And I was looking at the world completely differently at that time. I felt like I was by myself. And that is when, again, you see the world in a different light. That's not what other people are seeing, right? But that's what you're thinking and you're seeing. And the more you see that, then you start getting more depressed. You start numbing with alcohol more because you're thinking about, is there something wrong with me? So it's just like a snowball effect that starts to happen.
Do you remember like what the signs were for you that you kind of were like, this is wrong? Like wait to the point where you had to, did you push him to go get help or at that time, or was it kind of like Marcus like, no, he identified it in himself?
I think that Marcus was away from home so much and we had grown apart in our relationship, like to a point that I felt like I didn't know him anymore and I wasn't around him enough to really see these issues. And so, I knew that he drank a lot, but so did our entire community. So he was really no different than anyone else's husband as far as I could see. And a lot of the things I probably missed because we were apart most years, like up to 300 days a year. And I think, anytime someone visits you for a 5-day span, which is typically what it was, like, you come home from a trip on a Saturday and you're there and for the next week and then, you're right back out the door. You can pretend and play that everything's fine. And yeah, I just really didn't know. I think whenever I started noticing just the disconnectedness, the numbing, the anger,
Yeah.
um, and that escalated over, a number of years. And so then I started seeing like more neurological, cognitive types of issues, and that really scared me.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then Milan, I would I started breaking down like emotionally in random spots and times, like all the time. It could be anywhere, and I didn't know why. So there's obviously a lot of stuff going on internally that uh, I didn't I didn't have a grasp on, and I didn't understand. These are like classic, these are like the classic symptoms of post traumatic stress. Post traumatic stress and traumatic brain injury, um, they overlap the symptoms. So it's very difficult to say, well, you have TBI or you have PTSD because the symptoms are depression, anxiety, hypervigilance, um, headaches, like all these things. So it's very difficult. And, when you experience them, we start, getting scared too, because you're thinking like, is there something worse? Or is there something really wrong?
So what did you try and what was kind of recommended to you by the resources that you had at that time when you got your diagnosis?
I mean, I had access to military medicine. So traditional antidepressants, mood stabilizers, Ambien to go to sleep, Adderall, stayed awake, Provigil, Nuvigil to focus. Like there's like all these,
Yeah.
prescriptions that gave me just like horrible headaches, horrible side effects for years. But this is what I was being told, that this is what you need, or this is what you should try. And I'm not a doctor. I trust my doctor. And so you try these things. And, for me, it was like the gauntlet of failure, right? I was considered, I was resistant treatment. So I was treatment resistant. And so you could have gave me anything that we had access to, it was not going to work. And the talk therapy. I mean, I couldn't count the number of psychologists and therapists I had met with over the years.
So when was the first time that either of you heard about psychedelic-assisted therapy or any kind of psychedelic, treatment?
So I think to also touch back on the naivete, um, Marcus had done several deployments and we'd lost so many friends. It felt like we were getting out alive by the skin of our teeth. And so I think I naively thought that we would just become a normal family and start a civilian life like, you know, every other non-military family. And that's whenever the surveying the damage and really understanding the aftermath became our reality. I saw him trying to get better. I saw him being a great soldier and like, taking the doctor's orders and taking the pharmaceuticals and showing up for talk therapy. But like ultimately SEALs are unconventional soldiers. And I just thought there has to be something more. Like I'm also sort of a root cause warrior. And a lot of these um solutions were band-aids. It was just masking a symptom. And I just thought we've got to get to like what's truly um affecting him, and that's not going to be found in the current system. One of our friends who knew that we were struggling had reached out and said that it was actually her husband, who was a SEAL, had done a treatment in Mexico. And honestly, like, as desperate as we were, I was also very reluctant because it sounded crazy, but I did trust them and respected them greatly. And I approached Marcus with it and said, "So and so did this, and it apparently really changed his life." And he's like, "Absolutely not." But then he continued down the failed avenue route, and it got to a point where I felt like I really had to choose between staying in this, sticking it out, and hoping that something would eventually work, or getting the kids out of this cycle of insanity and misery and trying to start over. And I was sitting with that and realizing that, like, the stabilizing force of a family was probably the only thing keeping Marcus alive. And I knew that he was struggling with thoughts of, like, being a burden to us, and thinking that if he wasn't in the picture, that we would somehow, you know and that too is, I understand the thought, but it's not based in reality, because we would have dealt with that for the rest of our lives. And I just thought, I can't leave him and know that we left something on the table. I've got to know that I tried everything. And even if the worst happens, then I'll be able to forgive myself, and thinking like, "Well, we should have done that one thing." And so I changed my approach. We were both exhausted. I knew we were probably running out of time, whatever that meant. Um, and I just said, like, we gotta fight in a different way. I will never leave your side. I will fight alongside you, but you've gotta fight with me, and we've gotta fight in a new way." And he was very, receptive to that approach. And, even though he didn't think that it would actually work, he was like, "I mean, whatever. I'll try anything."
And so you had, what was your kind of, what did you know at the time about psychedelics?
Absolutely nothing.
Really?
I grew up in a very sheltered, conservative Christian home in the Midwest, and I didn't even know that Ibogaine was necessarily a psychedelic. I didn't understand what it was. I just knew it was a treatment in Mexico. And so, having lived in San Diego before, I was very aware of the medical tourism that happens, from everything from plastic surgery to stem cells and cancer treatments. And I didn't really know what it was. Um, so I didn't know what it was. I just trusted the individuals who said we should give it a try.
And what about you? When you first heard that this was an option going down to Mexico, what was your perspective on it?
Yeah, my first response was that this was crazy. Like, I didn't understand psychedelics outside of it being just recreational drugs. Like, that's all I knew. That's all I was taught. All I could think of was, hippies and running around with flowers in your hair. And so for me, this was absolutely insane that this was the option that was brought to me. It was like, hey, you did all these other things, but now we're going to treat you with this thing called psychedelics. And so it was absolutely crazy.
And
And then it took me a year to even commit to go get treated, because again, I just didn't think of it as a treatment. I thought of this as like just doing drugs. Yeah. And I didn't understand that. And so I had to do my research and talk to some people. And the more research you do, the more you realize that these were intended for uh, medicinal use, and that, like everything could be abused as recreational drugs. And so that's got me more comfortable making a decision to go do the treatment.
important to note too that we're talking about a time period of like 2015, 2016, pre-Michael Pollan, pre-psychedelic craze. Like, this was very obscure.
Yeah, outside of like the psychedelic community, like nobody knew. Everybody was in the same boat as me. Michael Pollan's book or the Netflix special did not come out yet, so people didn't know what psychedelics were, other than, again, recreational drugs, right? Unless you were in the industry or you're a researcher.
So can you tell me about the journey to your first psychedelic experience, and kind of, what that was like, and what you learned from it and gained from it?
Yeah, so I mean, I committed to doing treatment. So I got paired with a psychotherapist who'd been working with Ibogaine for, say, maybe 15 years. She came from like a Tibetan Buddhist philosophy. And so, she was really good at what she did. And so she prepared me because I had no idea what I was going into. Never had experience with anything like this and didn't know what I was going to expect. And so I kind of went in eyes wide open and,
I remember at one point, um, Marcus was like, "Do you remember that Beavis and Butthead episode where they're sucking the toad?" He was like, "That's basically what I'm doing. Like, that's what I'm going to do."
like looking back, that's literally what that was 5-MeO DMT. So they're sucking on the toad thinking like they're going to get high.
I
Yeah, it's kind of
I was just like, "Wait, what? What have I signed you up for? This is crazy."
so. I mean, when you take ibogaine, it's just like any other really pharmaceutical. Like it's in a pill form, and you take it for your body weight. Within 45 minutes to an hour, you start feeling the effects. For me, I had a individual room, nice bed. My therapist actually slept on the floor of the foot of my bed, so she was with me the whole night. And went through medical intake, blood work, urinalysis, EKG, so everything's clean. And when it's my journey, and I was there for about an hour, and I wasn't feeling anything. Usually, you start hearing like a little bit of a buzz, and what I noticed was I had eye shades on, but I can see the room completely. Like I could literally see the whole room that I was in, and I would like take them off, I would put them on. It was just odd, and obviously I was now in it, but didn't even know I was in it. And there was like a piece of art on the wall, like a 3D piece of art, and I was looking at it, and all of a sudden, the piece of art literally came out from the wall, fully extended, like right to me. And it wasn't scary and it wasn't intense at all. It was just the beginning, right? Like my mind was starting to see things, and hallucinate. And I had eye shades on, had music, and I just saw, oh man, I was like, I'm in it. Like this is it. And it was very peaceful. There was nothing, and then I started hearing some buzzing, and then the buzzing got louder and got louder. And then I'm trying to think the first time I actually purged or threw up. But at that time is like right when it started getting intense. And then it was war for the next, I would say, I don't know, 7 to 10 hours, or it's like 6 to 8 hours. I mean, it was extremely intense, a lot of visuals, a lot of dark, demonic, death, blood, fighting. It was just really gnarly. I mean, it was like the worst horror nightmare you could ever imagine. That's what I went through for 6 to 8 hours. I mean, it was terrible.
And also purging it though, because I remember
Yeah, and through that whole time, yeah, no, sorry.
no, no, go ahead. I'm zero
Yeah, my experience through that whole time, I was throwing up every 30 minutes, maybe, or so it felt like, and that was a struggle because you're in the middle of this gnarly experience of things. You're visiting things happen in your childhood, and then it was just like random experiences and random just gnarliness. And then I'd throw up, and that was tough. And then you go back and you recover a little bit, and then you're right back into the trip. And so it went on like that for a long time. And once I started coming out of it, I felt like the weight of the world started lifting off my shoulders. It felt like one of the doctors says it's like wearing a backpack full of bricks, and the bricks just kind of keep getting tossed out. And so at the end of your experience, you feel like you just, you had this heavy bag, 1,000 pounds of bricks on your back, and when you're done, it's light, it's zero. And that's how you felt. And so here I did 10 years of talk therapy in about 6 to 8 hours, 10 hours. You also have a long reflection period. And for me, I was so wiped out. My reflection period, I basically slept the whole next day. My sleep though, because the medicine's still in your system, so you're kind of going in and out of like light experiences. They're not intense, but it's a reflective period. So you're kind of reflecting on everything, all the crap that you just went through. and you finally wake up feeling a little bit better, I'd say 48 hours later, and you finally, you just kind of sit back and go, oh, man, like what the heck did I just go through? But you feel better. You feel like you just worked through a lot of different things.
And then you did DMT right afterwards, or 5
Well, you wait 48 hours. So kind of, and then you do it's a drug called 5-MeO-DMT. So it's not NN-DMT. It's 5-MeO. It's a different molecule. It's extremely powerful. Some consider the world's strongest psychedelic, along with ibogaine. So here you are doing two of the world's most powerful psychedelics back to back. It's a very spiritual experience compared to ibogaine. Ibogaine is a very dark experience that brings everything to the surface
For you.
for me.
For you. Yeah.
One of our facilitators at Ambio, Trevor, says it power washes you from the inside, where 5-MeO-DMT kind of polishes it after, right? And so my last 5-MeO experience, I did it a few times, was extremely spiritual. It was extremely powerful. I'll never forget it. I had immediately to do it again. I got everything I needed out of it. I saw that, we're not alone here. And this is like a temporary place, kind of like we're in this like body of flesh, and it's very, this is tangible. But what I felt and what I saw, what I experienced was eternal and very loving and unconditional love, like pure love. And it felt good. And it felt like, oh, okay, whatever happens here, I know where I'm going. And that kind of was the cherry on top. And, the rest is history.
Did you have what was your kind of religious background or your faith before that experience? And I mean, even during your time as a SEAL, like how did that influence any faith or, religious upbringing you might have had?
Yeah, I mean, my religious upbringing was very confusing. So I had a Jewish mom, okay, and a Catholic dad. And what they decided, I think they both, I would say, turned their back on their religions and raised me with nothing. So I had no religion growing up. I grew up in a very, in New York, very, a lot of Hasidic and Orthodox Jews, and then a lot of like Irish and Italian Catholics. And it was just that's the environment you grew up in New York. And, we celebrated Christmas, went to church like once a year. And, but to do that, like, what does that actually mean? And then my dad would go to work during the holidays, and my mom would bring out the menorah, and she liked the menorah, and he'd spin a dreidel. And so it was like this weird upbringing of no real religion. And so I tell people, like, I grew up confused. I don't know if that's good or bad.
Yeah, I mean, and then you came to have like kind of a mystical experience.
Truly mystical experience that was definitely not religious. So it wasn't, wasn't black, it wasn't white, it wasn't Catholic, it wasn't Jewish, it wasn't Muslim. It was just being, just by something more powerful than us. And that is it's extremely spiritual. And that was my experience. If you talk to others, these ibogaine and 5-MeO have brought people back to their faith. So if they were brought up, Christian, or they turned their backs, let's say on the church or whatever, many had such a powerful spiritual experience. They go back to their faith because they know, like, we're not alone. And I think that's awesome. I think that's pretty awesome.
So at the time, I get that there wasn't all of the Michael Pollan, craze out yet about how to change your mind and the other psychedelics like ayahuasca and LSD and mushrooms. Is it truly just not having known of the other protocols that you went after ibogaine and 5-MeO-DMT?
You're right. Yeah, it was what was presented to me. So if someone presented LSD, like, I would have done LSD, right? If someone presented psilocybin, because really the only reason I did ibogaine was because this other individual literally had his life changed from it, and I trusted him, and so I did that, right? So if he did psilocybin and had his life changed, that's what I would have done. I didn't know that there were other I mean, I'd heard of LSD, I've heard of mushrooms.
Yeah.
From a surface level, I had zero clue of what these did. So people who are in the industry and like are psychonauts, and when I tell them my first experience was with ibogaine,
Yeah.
I mean, like, whoa. And I was like, oh, my second experience was with 5-MeO-DMT. They're like, holy shit! Like you went from like 0 to 1,000, you know. But that's again, as Amber said, we're unconventional, right? The SEAL community, special operations community, like we just want to get the job done. So like, don't stair step me. Like, just let's go from 0 to 1,000. Let's get it done. I want to get better and get all my life.
And you still feel like ibogaine is probably the nuclear option, right?
It's absolutely a nuclear option. I think it's great. I mean, I think it is most powerful, you know, teacher that someone can utilize to change their life, grow out of a really bad spot, or optimize, you know?
And so when you came back, what was the energy coming back to civilization then? Like coming back from Mexico, all the hat.
Yeah, I was ready to like live again. I was like, hey, like, let's go. What do we got? Like, what's next? What's next to tackle? I was just so like glowy, they called the afterglow. I had the afterglow for a long time, right? I couldn't wait to see Amber. We saw each other at the house, like we embraced, and I was like, we got to help everybody. Like the world needs to know about this. Like I just wanted to like tell everybody how amazing this thing that I just went through. I mean, think about that. How amazing this was. And I just told you how dark and demonic. It was probably no doubt one of the hardest things I've ever done. And I said this is the most amazing thing because, I have a tagline that I use, like the only way is through. And it's true. No matter what we do in life, you're not talking to your parents, you have a coworker, you have a brother, sister, whatever it is, if you just bury those issues, they'll never find the solution. And so you have to go through, you have to confront your demons, right? That's what this does. It literally takes everything that you are struggling with and it holds it up in front of your face and says, hey, motherfucker, deal with this now. Like you don't have a choice. Like, you can't run. You're in like, you can't run. You could run from a therapist. You're like, you know what? I don't want to talk about that. Bye. You can't do that. You're on the drug. There's no coming back. You deal with this gnarly thing. You're like, okay, I'm gonna deal with this, and you deal with it, and it's gone, right? And that's the beauty of it is that you get to just deal with your issues very quickly, and that's why healing is so incredible.
What did you kind of notice when Marcus came back home? Like, was there, you know, yeah, what was the energy like? What could you see?
Well, first of all, whenever he left and I dropped him off at the airport, he got out of the car and I like just completely deflated because it felt like all this buildup, like the time had come and I had put it all on the table. And so I knew that this is it. One way or another, this is it. And I really wanted it to work, but I was also reluctant to believe that it could because so many things hadn't. I didn't want to get my hopes up, but I was very hopeful at the same time. It was a lot of emotion. And um
I mean, I remember what I said too. I remember saying, don't expect me to leave this weekend and come back any different or changed or something. Like, come on, like that's not going to happen. I
so
literally said that.
that was sort of the mindset that I was going in with was just like, okay, well, I guess I'm not going to expect anything because history would prove that, that nothing works. And he's already telling me that he doesn't think it's going to work. Therefore, I believe in the power of thoughts and the power of words. And, he's giving power to this not working. And I flew in the next day to go see him. And the SEAL that, had encouraged him to go and shared his own experience, which was sort of the catalyst for Marcus going, was updating me via text all throughout the night. And it was a very difficult journey. And so when it had resolved in the morning and he was, out of the experience and resting, I had this like freak out. where it was like, has it worked or not? And I was supposed to see him later that day. And I just had so much hesitation about seeing him because I would know immediately if it did or didn't. And in the car ride on the way to see him, um, the wife of the SEAL that was with Marcus said, "He's asking for you." Because I was like, I don't think I can go. I don't think that this is not a good idea. I'm really freaking out." And she's like, "He's asking for you. We told him you were coming. You have to go." And so when I saw him, like I heard him walking down the hall, I knew that that was the minute. That was the moment that I would know. And when he came around the corner, it was literally like being in his presence during the time that I first met him, where he was just this magnetic, full of light and life and love and like so charismatic and just so everything to me. And he had become this monster. And so his energy and his presence were back to the way that I remembered. And it was like, this is beyond my wildest expectation. Um, and also, like, you feel yourself sort of, like, letting go, like, letting the walls come down and becoming hopeful after years or decade plus of hopelessness, and then you're like, "Oh, it's too good to be true. It won't last." And, you're trying to put that protection back up. So the integration process was also a series of ups and downs, just managing, like, the expectations and the bad days it hasn't been perfect, for sure.
What does that look like the process of integration? What was that like? And kind of, did you play a role in that as well?
I had to go through my own integration period because I was so desperate in finding him help that, I didn't really look into what the help was or how this would come into play with my own upbringing, as a Christian. Um, and I had to go through weeks of unpacking the spiritual component of this because I was so scared that we had done something wrong or bad. And my therapist, thankfully, was like walking through this with me week after week. And she started with the most basic question, which was, were your prayers answered? And I was like, yeah, yeah. She said, was his life saved? Yeah. Was your marriage saved? Was your family restored? And, by that time, others were also experiencing it. And she was saying, like, these are all things of God. So how could it be bad?
Yeah, that's incredible. And so, okay, so what happened from that point to then realizing that you need to scale this somehow, and how did that get to vets?
We, at the time, we just wanted to pay it forward. And so we didn't really know what that was like, but we knew there were others, obviously, that were dealing with the same stuff that I was. We talked about, first time I saw the site, there's 200 people that were in there. So now it's grown. This is 2017. And I had a friend who was really struggling and reached out. I was like, hey, like, I'm not well. I said, well, let me tell you about this. And again, he knew nothing, just like I did. He just trusted my experience. And so we got him treated. And he was a totally different person, a much better person. You're like, that's weird. Two of the same experiences. We got another friend through, and then they brought two friends, and then we're trying to put together what we can, raise some money. We get a check from a friend's mother, a $25,000 check. We were able to treat 5 individuals with that check. And so we started figuring out, man, there's something really here. Like, we're helping individuals go do the same experience that I did. And so we filed for our 501c3 to be a nonprofit because we didn't know anything else, but paying it forward. Someone actually funded my experience, and we wanted to fund everybody else's experience. And we initially started working with a few different people, and other people had jobs and this and that. And not that we didn't have jobs, but we just like went all in, and like we just focused on this full time. And we received our 501c3 status, I think in 2019 or late 2018. And, kind of the rest is history. And this year we'll hit veteran number 1,000 that we fully funded for treatment. It's pretty remarkable.
It's the first thing he said to me was, this is it. This is it. We've got to pay this forward. We have to help everyone. And obviously we didn't know what that would look like, but because I do think that God is in it, the path has just been like, brrr, walk it. And the obedience and the vision of walking it has, not always been easy, but it's been something that's like so deeply rooted in me that I don't care how difficult it is. I know that it's the right thing to do. And I know from, walking up to that point of no return ourselves, how important it is.
How has your kind of perception on like hippie culture changed, or like that mindset around psychedelics in general? And is that still something that you, now being on the front lines of kind of getting veterans in, that you're kind of battling this like reputation of hippie culture that's like keeping people from getting help?
Yeah, the first of all, what I say now is like, hey, they had something right for sure. Actually, they had a lot of things right, but not everything. And I consider myself a sophisticated hippie. I really do think we have to open our eyes, ears. Um, you know, once we close off ourselves to learning, to the world, it's no good, right? That's not evolving. That's not evolution. And so we need to really turn over every stone and see what's out there. And for me, it was a whole new world that I knew nothing about, but that radically changed my life and is changing the lives of literally thousands of people, is hopefully going to change the lives of millions. And so we just have to be open to what's out there. And, hippies had definitely some things right, and they have other things that are not right. So,
Fair enough. And from there, you went on to create another company as well that's focused on psychedelics. I'm curious a little bit what that does, and just generally how you've navigated the legalities around all of this, running a nonprofit that's focused on psychedelics in the U.S. Is it, like what are all the different ways you've been able to reach people and help people, and what does the new company do?
yeah. So my company is Tower Mind. We're expanding affordable access to mental health care. We are focused on novel treatments, and I go deeper. We're focused on psychedelic-assisted therapies, where we're focused on FDA-approved drugs. And so today, our network is built with ketamine clinics that are provided by psychiatrists, and we built a large network around the country of like over 500 providers now of psychiatrists and therapists. And we power it by a platform to enable them to actually be able to talk to each other, which doesn't happen today. How that got started, my co-founder, he had been involved in vets for a number of years, and he saw the impact that what we were doing. And he just said, like, this is much bigger than veterans. Like, this is like, the world needs this. And I got hired on to the venture capital firm that he had founded. And we just tried to figure out, how do you take what we learned to do with veterans, and how do we transfer that or pivot that to the private sector? And how we're doing it is through FDA approved.
We focus on legal pathways. I'm curious a little bit, like, among the veteran community as well, and kind of just what you know, how effective have those legal treatments been, like ketamine assisted therapy as well?
So at Tower Mind today, we focus on ketamine assisted therapy. It's what we have access to. Ketamine technically is not a psychedelic, however, it puts you in a psychedelic-like experience. It's been around since 1960. It's the number one drug we could use right now for an individual that's got clinical depression that's not responding to the current antidepressants. So what we've done at Tower Mind is we built this network of individuals that are skilled in providing ketamine-assisted psychotherapy. We put it into this like standard of care. We're taking that and we're bringing that to self-funded employers. So this is a covered health product service that your employer would offer to you as an employee, 100% covered benefit. We're collecting data, and within a year and a half, we'll go back to the insurance companies, the Uniteds, the Aetnas, the Cignas, and we'll show them that these individuals have improved significantly. And then we're going to ask them to cover this for all their covered lives. So that's basically that.
That's very cool. And are you mostly focused on vets?
The organization is more or less three in one, because we provide direct programmatic services to veterans and this new battle for access to care. We also provide a ton of support services and community engagement opportunities to feel purpose again and feel connected again. So aside from the program piece, we're also sponsoring research happening in the United States that will allow us to pair the voices within our program alongside the data to really impact scale at the policy level. So we've got initiatives happening at state level, federal level, and the education and advocacy that we have engaged in over the last number of years, I think has really helped to bring validity to the movement and educate everyone from concerned spouse to veterans to lawmakers, military leaders. It's been really remarkable to see the movement gain so much traction, and I think veterans are largely at the forefront of that, because they're a population that everyone can agree deserves care once they hang up their service to the country. So it's been a beautiful bipartisan sort of area.
Do you feel like the progress in getting psychedelic-assisted therapy scalable beyond ketamine in the US has been held back by politics, held back by lack of research? Is it both? And kind of what has the response now been?
Well, because so many of these compounds are Schedule 1 substances, the research is slow going at best, and there's no federal funding for research, or there hasn't been. There's been a little bit over the last couple of years, but not really enough to make an impact. So the research that has emerged over the last decade plus has been a continuation of the favorable research in the 40s and 50s and 60s that was all halted with the Controlled Substances Act of 1970. And so whenever substances are classified as Schedule 1, there's so much red tape in being able to study them. And then everything's philanthropically funded. So the major slowdown right now, I think, is in primarily around regulation and funding. I think once the research can really open up, we're very confident on what the outcomes will be. And then I think, we're talking about a different landscape.
From the time that you kind of found out about psychedelics to now, how has the culture changed or evolved from what you each have perceived, like even among veterans, but maybe even beyond veterans?
I mean, what I've seen is that, we were talking about hippies earlier. Like, I see now center right, like conservatives are absolutely opening up to psychedelic therapy. Like, there's no doubt. There's no left. There's no right anymore. This is, as Amber mentioned, a bipartisan issue. I don't want it to be political at all. I shouldn't be political. But that's what I've really seen, is that individuals who you would never expect to raise their hand or give me a call and say, hey, can I go do Ibogaine? And it's somebody from the C-suite who's never done a drug in their life. But again, they've read, they trust B, they've opened up their minds a little bit to, hey, there's something out there that's probably better than what your doctor is probably giving you today. So to me, that's what I've seen over the last couple of years, is policymakers that are being vocal about their own personal experiences with this, and individuals that you would never expect seeking out these treatments.
And I would add to that we were featured in Oprah Daily, not that long ago. I read an article about soccer moms and psilocybin a couple of years ago. Like, the narrative is shifting far beyond the psychonaut and even veteran community. It really has gone mainstream. Along with that, I do have a concern that the hype is outpacing the science, and the real possibility of a repeat to counterculture and what happened in the 60s is likely because these are such powerful substances and there can be adversity associated with them. Unsupported journeys are, in our opinion, very, very dangerous and a very um, stark reality, unfortunately. And so, where the veteran community in particular, you have a population of individuals who is suffering greatly. They're very trusting of one another. And so they're sharing, they want to help. They're telling their friends, have you tried psilocybin or ibogaine or whatever? Getting your hand on a bag of psilocybin mushrooms is not the same as being in administered in a clinically guided medical setting with the proper integration and preparation support. So we really, I would say, are concerned about the hype.
Can you tell me a little bit about the difference between doing psychedelics on your own, outside of, an assisted therapy setting?
I think setting, you always hear about, what's your mindset and what type of environment are you in. It's a big deal. Many, these experiences can go south very quickly if you're not in the right mind frame. And right mind frame, a lot of that has to do with preparation with a coach, preparation with a therapist prior to these experiences. Setting is the other piece to this. So if an individual has never done this before, or even maybe they struggle with some anxiety or some trauma, and they decide to do these substances on their own at a party, out in public, places where it's probably not the right environment to feel safe.
Yeah.
That anxiety can hit again, and then these journeys could go really far south, and they can be really detrimental, tough for the individual. And so the other piece is the dosing. If the individual just hearing about, hey, psilocybin saved my life, people have no idea. Should I be taking 5 milligrams, 50 milligrams, 20? They have no clue, right? And so here now, an individual has no idea of how much they're supposed to take of a certain substance, and you're rolling the dice. It's just like if you're taking a pharmaceutical drug, there's dosing on there, right? There's 50 milligrams of something compared to 800. Like, that's a big deal. That could hurt your stomach. It could do all types of things. So these drugs, as Amber said, are really powerful, and we have to approach them with reverence and care. And when done correctly, they can be, as we know, magical and life-saving.
Something that I definitely believe in a lot is the power of storytelling to help culture kind of evolve. And it's super interesting to hear from your perspective, I think, on how there's like this nuance between getting kind of ahead of ourselves in the psychedelic movement again, and counterculture being able to actually be a detriment to the progress that can be done with them and in the mental health sphere and as a treatment. Can you talk a little bit about the movie or the documentary that you two have been a part of, and kind of the role that you hope that plays in, I guess, kind of helping the culture evolve?
Totally. So we've been filming this documentary for, not filming the entire 5 years, but we started working on it about 5 years ago, and we were very reluctant to become involved. But we also realized that they're telling the story of the work that we're doing, whether we're part of it or not, or Bets is featured or not. They were just really excited about the notion of capturing these real life stories that are happening week in, week out, and the transformations that are taking place. And so we reluctantly agreed to sort of gatekeep and advise, and then eventually found ourselves as subjects of this film, along with two of Marcus's very close friends from, they've been friends for like 20 years. And the story is captivating because our lives have been intertwined for these 2 decades in a number of ways. And so, to see the final product is really humbling. It's an honor. It's something that I think will impact countless lives and bring hope to a very hopeless world. I feel like, everyone is only 1 degree separated from someone who's suffering. And so to see these larger than life characters admit that they're struggling, I think will encourage others to do the same.
Yeah, I watched the movie and I see extremely hard, tough individuals um, m- open up and tell the world, hey, I needed to raise my hand for help. There was a point in my life that almost felt like rock bottom, and I was able to climb out because I asked for help. And I think, as Amber mentioned, when you have individuals that are so tough and are so hardened and also show that they can be vulnerable and struggle and then bounce back and then be stronger than they were before and then pay it forward. I mean, that message is just that's a global movement. That's real healing that's going on, and it can have real impact, not just in single digit or thousands of folks. I mean, this can potentially reach, everyone. And to pay it forward is why we're here.
Now being like you know, a new face for hippies almost. What is your perception now when you look back of military, of war, being a Navy SEAL? Has any of that changed?
Yeah, I mean, I won't take anything back that I did. I think it was everything I wanted to do at the time. I still think it's allowed me the opportunities that I have today. It's stuff that I'll cherish forever. I I think we all change, we all grow, we look at things differently. I think we make better decisions than when we were younger. And so, if I knew some of the things that I know now back then, um, probably be I probably would have been a better operator, better leader, better person. Um,
Yeah, yeah, fair enough. And what about as like a family now? What is the kind of know, like when you look back as well, the evolution of kind of your family unit and how psychedelics has had an impact, and how do you kind of foresee that time?
The ripple out effect of how psychedelics have impacted our entire family, through let me think about how to say this the best. The ripple out effect of the impact of psychedelics on our family, um, has been remarkable. I think that the ripple out can go either way. When one person in the family unit is struggling, others in the family are affected. So our son, for example, as the film depicts, was really struggling during the time that Marcus was really struggling. And then he says later on in the movie, when my dad started to stabilize and get better, we all saw how hard he was working, and it inspired the rest of us. Our whole family unit just started to work again. And that's very, very true. I think that, it can definitely work to end and alleviate generational trauma cycles and allow true, genuine connection to occur. Um, and I just look at Marcus's life on like a larger scale as well, beyond our family unit, and how close we likely were to losing him, and how that would have impacted us for the rest of our lives. And none of this work would be happening. And because he's here and his one life was saved, countless other lives have been impacted as well. So, for anyone struggling, I would just say that, better days are absolutely possible, and not just better days, but like true life's purpose and impacting others through your own story of struggle or suffering and healing.